Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. I want to start this off by saying sorry for not posting for almost a week. I've been busy with school and everything, so I haven't really had time to read or post any videos, so sorry about that. Excuse the way I sound. I might sound a bit different. I'm kind of coming down with a little bit of a cold, and also excuse me if I sniffle out of nowhere. You know how it is to have a cold. Exactly. So today we're going to be continuing reading The Roar by Emma Clayton. And we're going to be reading Chapter 3, Monkey Business. Mal Gorman went down to the shadows to see the proof that Ellie and Puck were dead with his own eyes. He wanted to watch as their bodies were poured out of the river and sealed into coffins so he could be sure nobody would find out that he kidnapped a child or an animal had crossed the wall. He knew it was his fault. He'd given Ellie the monkey as a pet and underestimated her ability. And although he was confident he wouldn't lose his job, he didn't want to admit he'd made such bad mistakes. Mal Gorman wasn't used to making mistakes, and they felt like bee stings on his brain. But how could he have known a 12-year-old child would be able to escape from the space station? Ellie was amazing, so powerful and strange, and although he was relieved the monkey was dead, he was annoyed the girl was. Now he would never know why she was so special, and he wouldn't be able to use her. He felt as if he'd dropped a Ming vase and was looking at the pieces on the floor around his feet. But there are more where she came from, he reminded himself. Not many, but enough. The hours before dawn and the shadows were the same as midnight sunset and early afternoon, the artificial darkness hardly touched by the yellow tinge of Economy lightning. Only the temperature and wind changed. In summer it was hot and humid as a tin can of stagnant water, and in winter it was bitterly cold. At all the seasons damp crept up the buildings, covering everything in a mold that caused deadly lung disease. Mal Gorman hated the shadows, particularly at 4:45 in the morning when he was supposed to be on vacation. He stood on the deck of a police boat, chugging up the old path of the River Thames, looking over the dismal escape of damp buildings half submerged in filthy water. The river had burst its banks long ago and spread across the low-lying areas of the city. He spotted the moldy remains of the Tate Modern and the Tower of London, but it wasn't the kind of sightseeing he enjoyed. These landmarks were lifeless and stripped of treasures. Below him on the boat, the cabin staff were preparing breakfast, and a small team of policemen were eating fab egg and tank meat and drinking tea with their guns on the floor. Gorman was too tired and stressed to eat, but at least the worst is over, he thought. Soon I'll be able to forget about the work and enjoy my vacation. He shivered and pulled up the collar on his long coat to protect his neck from the bitter wind. His companion on deck was the chief of river police, an unsavory character, Gorman thought, who spent his days hooking corpses out of the flood water and his nights gorging himself in expensive restaurants in the Golden Turns. His eyes were mean, his face was puffy, and his skin was spotty and sallow. "I don't know how you can work down here," Gorman said. You get used to it," the chief replied dismissively, his chins wobbling like a pile of undercooked pancakes. "We shouldn't be here long. They know where she went down, and they've got plenty of experience. She'll be the 20th corpse they fished out tonight. Have to get them out, otherwise they sink. I can smell sausages." "Do you trust your men?" Gorman asked. "Yes," the chief said after a brief pause. "They've bought plague suits and breathing equipment. They're so scared they've been drawing lots to decide who has to deal with it. They won't tell anyone. Not even their wives and children will touch them if it gets out that they've been near an animal." "Good," Gorman replied, "because if they talk about what comes up in that pod fighter, I have the authority of the Northern government to ruin your life. Do you understand?" "Yes, sir," the chief replied, his chins wobbling pensively. He was quiet for a moment and picked the dirt from beneath his fingernails. There was something about Mal Gorman that chilled him more than the horrors in the dark water below. Gorman looked over the side of the boat. Bobbling on the surface of the water was a carpet of rotting rubbish. He saw a child's doll float past, sightless and gruesome and covered in slime, fast food wrappers, and a moldy sneaker. What a mess, he thought. 43 years of living behind the wall had created a blinded nightmare. The entire population of the planet was now squashed into a third of the space to escape from the animals, and every acre of the land had been built upon. And there were no fields no more, no woods or parks or gardens. There was no space for anything but concrete and people. Gorman had a nice log cabin in Canada before the animal plague. He used to go there for his vacations, not London. But now his pretty cabin had a block of apartments built on top of it, and hundreds of people lived in the area that used to be his garden. "Ah," said the chief of river police, breaking Gorman's bitter reverie. He looked toward the dark silhouette of a boat in the distance near the old Houses of Parliament. "We should be there in just time to watch the men bring them up. They need a hearty breakfast, to chase off the cold. In fact, I think I might have a couple of sausages while I'm waiting." Gorman watched the chief squeeze his huge body through the small door into the cabin like a cushion onto a mouse hole. Disgusting man, he thought. He was cold and tired, and he wanted to sit down and rest his knees. He cursed Ellie and paced across the deck of a boat, wishing it would hurry up so he could get back to his warm hotel on level 2. Good job her parents already think she's dead, he thought, imagining the uproar if they found out that what had really happened to their daughter. Gorman had lost his log cabin because of the animal plague, but in other ways what had ruined most people's lives had improved his dramatically. Because of the plague, there were loads of good jobs available, so he'd been able to work his way up in the new northern government to become the Minister for Youth Development. He was part of the cabinet. He had a fancy office in the new Houses of Parliament, and the Queen of the North, a whole space station, was under his command. He was now one of the richest and most powerful people in the North, so he was glad the animal plague happened. He never would have done so well without it. And the other great thing about the disaster, as far as he was concerned, that having babies had been banned for 30 years afterward because there wasn't enough space for them. So not only did he have a much better job, he'd been able to spend his new money in restaurants without a child at the next table screaming his head off or rubbing chocolate pudding in his hair. He hated children, and he didn't understand them. He remembered how rude Ellie had been, so ungrateful. In fact, all of them were. The 3 children he'd taken all come from poor refugee homes, and they should have thanked him for the attention. He'd given them presents and candies and kept them busy with activities, yet all they'd done was cry and complain about how missing their families. And now they were all dead. He realized he would need to try a different tactic next time. He soon would need thousands of children, not just 3, and he had been able to control them. He just wouldn't do if they were crying all the time and trying to run away. But before he could think about starting again, he had to clean up the mess his early mistakes had made. The boat's engine cut as it approached the salvage boat and drifted off the last 30 feet in silence. The salvage boat was much bigger than the police boat, low in the water with a wide deck, and the stern was a huge black crane designed to haul away heavy weights out of the water. Men threw ropes to bind the 2 crafts together and placed a wide plank to bridge the gap between them. Gorman watched the chief of river police shuffle across the plank, making it bow under his enormous bulk. Then he followed him onto the wide deck of the salvage boat. Afterward, the men dressed in plague suits and gloves carried 2 white coffins across, a large one for Ellie and a smaller one for Puck. Oh, goodness. The boat crewed by the river in the black trench coats and caps. The arm of the crane towered over the water, and Gorman watched as a man operated the machines that reeled in the metal rope like a fishing line, creaking with the weight of Ellie's pod fighter below the surface. "Nearly up," the chief said, taking a tank meat sausage out of his pocket and cramming it sideways into his mouth. The divers were just out of their water. They seemed in a hurry and wrestled their masks off as they flopped like seals onto the deck. "They're still alive," one shouted, panic-stricken. "What shall we do?" Gorman and the chief rushed to the bow of the boat and leaned over to look down into the murky water. The pod fighter was just below the surface, and they could see Ellie thrashing around in the pocket of air inside it, her dark hair whipping around her pale face as she frantically banged around the edges of the windshield, trying to force it open. "Well, I'll be blowed," the chief said. "She's a little firecracker." "Stop the crank!" Gorman yelled. "Get guns! I want 6 armed men here now!" The chief of Rivers stared, mesmerized, into the dark water, his heart racing as he caught a glimpse of the capuchin monkey and the submerged pod fighter. He hadn't seen a real animal since he was a child, during the plague. He saw a blink of gold fur, a flash sharp white teeth, and a tiny black hand pressed against the inside of the wheel. "Criminy," he said, welling up with fear. "I haven't got a plague suit. I think I'd better wait on the other boat." He took a step back, and another, creeping toward the plank, but the men rushing the other way had blocked his path, and he was pushed forward again. The policemen gazed in horror over the side of the boat to the submerged pod fighter and caught a brief glimpse of their worst nightmare. "Kill them!" Mal Gordon ordered. "Shoot them through the windshield!" They hesitated. Buck disappeared for a moment, and Ellie was just looking up at them, her face wet with tears. She was just a child. Ellie and Puck had been on the bottom of the river for over an hour. The weight of the dark water pressing on the windshield made it creak and groan as Ellie's eyes adjusted to the darkness. She saw terrible shapes around her, wafting black weeds like evil spirits wanting to drag her and Puck out of their bubble of air and drown them. It was so cold and dark on the river bed, and what she felt was beyond terror. She was drowning in fear. She couldn't breathe for it. It tightened around her chest like iron bands, and she choked. She undid Puck's harnesses, pulled him close, and they clung to each other in the darkness, waiting for the water to come in. They could hear it gushing into the engine, but by some miracle the cockpit remained dry. Gorman would come for them. Ellie knew that the evil old man would take no chances, would make sure that they were dead, and she wasn't sure whether to feel relieved or terrified. If he didn't come, they would die of suffocation when the oxygen in the cockpit ran out. If he did, they would be shot. So she waited and tried to figure out how they could still survive and reach home. As the driver's lamps shone down through the water, she saw the fear in Puck's eyes and gave her strength. She would swim home through this filthy black water if necessary, with Puck clinging to her back. The divers approached the ropes, and the pod fighter and Ellie felt it rock in the water and as it was winched up. Her heart beat madly, and she was prepared for it to break the surface of the river, and when she saw the men leaning over the side of the boat, she panicked for a moment and tried to push the jammed windshield open with her hands, then thought of a better idea. "It's okay," she whispered, her mouth pressed to the monkey's head. "We can do this. We just need to stay calm." She pulled Puck up so he was hanging off her neck, took a deep breath, and focused her gaze on the windshield until it began to glow. Only Gorman realized what was about to happen. He saw Ellie's expression change and recognized the intense concentration in her dark eyes. "Look out!" he yelled, lifting his hands to protect his face, but it was too late. A second later, every man on the boat was hit by a shower of filthy water as the windshield was blown clean off of the pod fighter as if a bomb had exploded inside it. The next few moments were a blur of watery confusion. Some of the men dropped their guns on the deck and had to bend down and fumble around for them in the darkness. Others were blinded by the dirty water and had to wipe their eyes off the sleeves of their plague suits. By the time they had recovered, Ellie was gone. The pod fighter was filling up with water, and the chief of river police was staggering around the boat with a monkey attached to his head. "Help!" he screamed. "Ah!" He lurched back and forth, desperate to get away from him. The men forgot their guns and began running around as if they were playing musical chairs with no chairs left. And all of this movement and noise made Puck even more afraid. Unable to see Ellie and wanting to stop the screaming and motion, the monkey bit the chief's ear right off, then raised his head, bared his blood-covered fangs, and screeched at the men as if he was possessed by the devil. It was the most terrifying sight they had ever seen, and as the chief's blood bubbled in the monkey's mouth, they froze as if the game had changed and they were now playing musical statues. "Don't just stand there like a row of cabbages," Gorman yelled, frantically looking around for Ellie. "Just shoot it! you fools. Where's the girl? Someone kill that monkey, and find that fragging girl." Ellie was clinging to the side of the boat in the darkness, with the current tugging at her legs. The water was so cold she was already numb from the chest down, and was barely able to breathe. Choking and shuddering, she just desperately tried to strengthen her grip against the deadly pool of water. "Puck will never survive this," she thought desperately. "The current is too strong. The water is too cold." Her jaw juttered, and her left hand lost its grip for a moment, and she only just managed to find another before she was swept away. She heard the chief scream as Puck bit him, and Gorman yelling at his men, and spurred by a desperate urge to save her animal friend, she managed to clamber over the side of the boat and went and stood among them. They were spooked by the strangeness of her. In her wet white clothes she looked like a child-sized angel, but her eyes were darker than the bottom of the river. She tucked her hair behind her ears and glanced at Puck. He leaped powerfully from the chief's shoulder to land in her arms, where he clung to her with his back to the men and his face pressed against her neck. "Kill them!" Gorman rasped. So consumed by rage he sounded as if he was trying to scream with lungs full of dried leaves. "Quickly!" They heard a heavy splash and looked around to see that the terrified chief had jumped over the side of the boat into the river. They watched as the darkness swallowed him, flailing his arms then raised their guns and pointed them at Ellie. There was no hesitation this time. The child had a plague animal hanging out their neck with the chief's blood on its teeth, and by some witchery she had blown the windshield off of a pod fighter. But stranger things were about to happen. In the darkness, with the drifting black water around them, they would remember meeting Ellie and Puck for a long, long time. As they took aim and prepared to fire, Ellie's eyes began to burn like black coals, and her pale skin glowed as if white light had been turned on inside her. The men felt a strange sensation in their hands and a tingling sensation as if their veins were being invaded by her energy. Then their guns moved, squirming and wriggling in their hands as if they had come alive and wanted to escape. The child didn't move, didn't blink or make a sound. She just watched them calmly. They couldn't shoot her. Their guns refused to point at her, and even when the men held them with both hands. And before they had a chance to figure out what she was doing, 2 of the guns were in Ellie's hands and the rest were in the river. The men looked at their empty palms as if they'd never seen them before. Then Ellie, in fear, "Get away from us," she said quietly, edging toward the plank leading to the other boat, "or I'll kill you all." The men began to move back, terrified of and few looked over the side of the boat and considered following the chief into the freezing water. "Stay where you are!" Gorman yelled at the men. "And you," he sneered, glaring at Ellie, "you take one more step and your brother, your mother, and your father will die. There are men outside your home in Barford North waiting for orders. You only have yourself to blame, Ellie. I have the power to kill them all." Ellie froze, her heart feeling as if Gorman had run it through with a sword. "You know you can't go home, Ellie," Gorman said, his eyes hard on her face. "I need you." "I just want to tell them that I'm not dead," Ellie said quietly, her eyes brimming with tears. "That's all. I won't tell them the secret, I promise." "Well, you can't," Gorman stated coldly. "You belong to us now." "Please," she begged. "Just let me see them for a few minutes. I miss them so much." "No," he said. "Why?" she cried. "Why won't you let me see them? What do you want from me?" "You'll find out soon enough," he said. "Please tell me," she cried. "Why won't you tell me? You've taken me from my family, but you won't even say why. Please." "No," he said angrily. "I'll tell you when I'm ready to tell you, not when you decide." She looked away from him, tears burning in the back of her throat. It was impossible. How had she ever believed she could escape Mal Gorman? She felt her body slump with sadness, and the guns fell from their hands to the deck. "Get in that," Gorman ordered, pointing at the larger coffin. "And make Puck get in his before I decide to kill him for all the trouble you've caused me. You've ruined my vacation, Ellie." Ellie was shocked to see the coffins on the deck, the large one for her and the smaller one for Puck. Gorman grabbed her arm with his bony fingers. "No!" she wept as he pushed her towards it. He was surprisingly strong for a walking skeleton. "We won't be able to breathe in there. We'll suffocate." Gorman picked up one of the guns and shot in a few holes in the lids. "There you go," he snapped. "Air holes. Now get in." Her hands shook as she spoke, comforting words to Puck and encouraging him to lie down in his coffin. It was awful. He was looking up at her with his bright eyes full of trust as she felt overwhelmed by guilt. Poor Puck. As she closed the lid, she could hear him hooting with fear and confusion inside. She climbed into the other coffin with tears running down her face, feeling a new emotion, a murderous anger and hatred like she'd never felt before. She felt as if something was growing inside her, revving up a heat and noise like a stampede. Gorman stood up between the two coffins and looked down on her. He was also feeling a new emotion, or at least one he hadn't felt in a long time. He felt a bit warm inside, a bit glad. He had her back, alive, and all that effort and money hadn't been wasted after all. And, he realized, he'd learned through his experience how to control her. Perhaps this new job wasn't going to be so hard after all. All he'd have to do was threaten to kill the monkey and the people she loved, and she'd do whatever she was told. "Things will get better for you soon," he said, almost kindly. "In a few weeks you'll have some new friends to keep you company." "You're going to steal more children?" Ellie asked, glaring up at him. "Isn't killing two enough?" Her chest felt hot and her head began to throb as her anger and hatred intensified, and the sounds of the stampede became the roar of a single beast, a cloven, raged beast in her mind. 100 children wouldn't be enough, Gorman said. "One day you'll understand." "I hope not," she replied bitterly, "because if I did, that would mean I had to become like you." "Your new friends will want to come," Gorman continued. "They'll be begging to work for me." Ellie glared at him, wishing he were dead, feeling all her hatred and her anger coming out like black rods from her eyes. For a few seconds, Gorman met her gaze confidently. He was even smiling a little, pleased with himself. She didn't mean to do it. She didn't even know she could do it. And when Gorman flinched and pulled his head back, she made no link between her gaze and his pain. He opened his mouth to gasp, and his body turned rigid as if he were being electrocuted. His shoulders jabbed up, and his hands began to shake as if he were malfunctioning, bored. Then a thin trickle of blood ran out of one of his dry nostrils, and he closed his mouth again and made his awful creaking noise as his teeth ground together. Ellie became aware that her eyes felt like magnets locked into his head. She tried to drag them away, suddenly understanding what she was doing to him. Gorman realized too. He could hear the roar, feel her anger and hatred like scalpels slicing his brain. It was the worst pain he had ever experienced. "Shut the lid," he rasped, falling against the policeman who held out his arms to catch him. "Shut it quickly." The policeman kicked Ellie's coffin lid closed, and the last thing she saw for several weeks was the paleness of terror on Mal Gorman's face. Alrighty, so that's chapter 3 of The Roar. I hope all of you enjoyed that, if you could understand me well. So just subscribe if you want to hear more, and hit that bell button because I literally have no scheduled time for posting. And just hit the bell to get a notification anytime I post. Leave a like or dislike. I really don't care, but I prefer a like. So I hope all of you enjoyed it, and have a nice day or night or whenever you're listening to this. Bye!